Hello, my name is Sky. You ever realize your family never loved you? Just the version of you that kept paying the bills? Christmas Eve, I told them I got promoted. My dad stood up and screamed, "Get out, Leech!" My mom didn't say a word. The next day, I found a receipt. My laptop had been pawned for $300 by her. Then the lights went out at their house. Then the police showed up. Then my dad had to hand over the keys. But what hurt more than all of that? Knowing they'd planned it. How do you heal when the people who raised you are the ones who erased you? The morning had started like any other Christmas Eve, with me in the kitchen before sunrise. I was still in my flannel pajamas, rolling out pie crusts with flour smudged on my cheek, humming quietly to drown out the drone of the TV from the living room. My family was already settled on the couch, coffee mugs in hand, eyes glued to the football game as if it were a holy ritual. No one had come in to ask if I needed help. And no one had offered to peel a potato, stir the gravy, or even set the table. But I told myself they were just tired, and maybe, just maybe, they'd notice everything once dinner was ready. For the past 3 weeks, I'd worked overtime, not just at the firm, but here too, paying the gas bill, covering the Wi-Fi so Cairo could stream his content, and making sure Mom's insurance stayed current for her checkups. I was used to it. I had gotten so good at disappearing behind the scenes that I started to believe invisibility was love. But today was supposed to be different. By 4 p.m., the dining table was dressed with the best we had: taper candles, faded placemats, the one chipped china set we only pulled out twice a year. The turkey had rested just enough to stay warm, and the smell of cinnamon and nutmeg still hung in the air. I changed into my navy blue sweater dress, took a deep breath, and sat down between Mom and Cairo. My hands trembled slightly, not from nerves but from exhaustion, and I told myself again that tonight I'd finally feel like I belonged. Dinner started quietly, the kind of silence that's thick, not peaceful. Forks clinked. Cairo asked if the mashed potatoes were from a box. I didn't answer. I waited until everyone had at least touched their plate before I cleared my throat. "So," I began, smiling gently, "I have some news." Mom looked up, her mouth still chewing. Dad didn't even pause. Only Cairo leaned back slightly, probably assuming I'd gotten engaged. I wasn't sure what I expected, but it wasn't what came next. "I got promoted last week," I said. "Senior financial analyst." Dad's fork paused mid-air. "Oh," Cairo muttered. "Cool." Mom sipped her water. "That's nice, honey." Then silence. It hung there, long enough for the warmth of my own words to turn bitter in my mouth. I felt it all unravel in real time, this fragile hope I'd wrapped so tightly around their reaction, but I wasn't ready for what came next. My father slammed his fork onto his plate, the sound sharp and final. "Get out," he snapped. "You leech." The word hit me like a slap. It didn't even make sense. Me? The leech? "I'm sorry?" I managed. "Barely." "You heard me," he growled. "You've been using this house as a damn hotel, acting like you're the boss, talking about your job like we owe you something." The room froze. My heart pounded, but everything around me slowed. Cairo's eyes darted to Mom. Mom didn't meet mine. She was busy rearranging the green beans on her plate, like they might spell out a different reality. No one defended me. "You live here rent-free," Dad continued, voice rising. "Like we're supposed to be grateful when you show up and pay a bill or two. You ain't special, Sky. You're not better than us." I blinked. My lips parted, but nothing came out. I wanted to scream, to list every bill I'd paid, utilities, groceries, insurance, to remind him that when Mom lost her job, I stepped in without hesitation, that when Cairo's car broke down, I paid for the repairs, that the Christmas ham on the table was bought with a bonus I barely had time to celebrate. Instead, I sat in stunned silence, because no amount of receipts would fix this. Then Mom added her piece. "Well," she said, not looking at me, "let's be honest. You just got lucky, Sky. That promotion could have gone to anyone." I turned to her, stunned all over again. Lucky? I echoed. She nodded, still pushing food around. You've always had good timing, that's all. And just like that, every moment of self-doubt I had ever buried came rushing back. Every time she'd smiled and clapped when Cairo showed his art projects, but brushed off my report cards. Every time Dad praised Cairo's ambition, even when he hadn't worked in months. I had mistaken tolerance for acceptance, contribution for connection. They didn't just resent my success, they never saw it to begin with. I looked around the table and felt more alone than I had ever felt in my life. The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was hollow, the kind that makes you realize you were never part of the conversation to begin with. My chair scraped quietly against the floor as I stood. I folded my napkin, placed it beside my untouched plate, and straightened my shoulders. No one asked where I was going. I walked toward the front door, grabbed my coat from the hook, and slid it on. My hands moved automatically. Keys, wallet, phone, all muscle memory. Outside, the air had turned crisp. Snow flurried lightly, just enough to dust the porch. I didn't slam the door. I didn't look back. I walked to my car, a dented silver Honda, older than Cairo's but still running thanks to my maintenance budget, and slid into the driver's seat. My fingers gripped the steering wheel tighter than I needed to. I sat there for a minute, the cold leather seeping into my coat, before turning the key. The engine hummed to life, low and steady. I hadn't said a word, but somehow, silence hurt them more than anything I could have screamed. By the time I pulled into the driveway again, the snow had thickened just enough to blur the familiar cracks in the pavement. My headlights cut through the darkness, catching the warped slats of the garage door that hadn't worked properly in years. The house looked different from the outside, colder, like it somehow knew I didn't belong there anymore. I left the engine running for a moment, not because I was cold, but because I needed to sit in the quiet hum of something that still listened when I turned the key. The porch light was off. Typical. I killed the engine, pocketed my keys, and stepped out into the stillness. My boots crunched lightly over the snow as I walked up the front steps. I didn't knock. The spare key was still under the broken flower pot. Of course, they hadn't moved it. The lock turned with a soft click, and I slipped inside, careful not to let the door creak. The house was dark, except for the faint blue glow from the television in the living room. I could hear the familiar rhythm of Dad's snores coming from the recliner. Cairo's door was shut, music pulsing faintly through the wood. Mom's light was off, but I knew better than to assume she was asleep. She had a way of pretending to rest, just to eavesdrop. I kept my footsteps light as I moved toward the stairs. Every step up that staircase felt like wading through a memory. That house had been the backdrop of my entire childhood. Birthday parties, silent dinners, Cairo's tantrums, my report cards left unopened on the counter. Now, it was just walls. My old bedroom was exactly as I'd left it. Pale yellow walls, a corkboard still pinned with fading receipts and college acceptance letters, and the scent of something vaguely nostalgic, old paper maybe, or the lavender candle I left behind last spring. I dropped my purse onto the desk chair and opened my closet. My overnight bag was already there, the same one I'd taken on work trips. I began folding sweaters into it one by one, mechanically. But when I reached for my laptop, the one I always kept in the drawer under the printer tray, it wasn't there. I checked the desk, the nightstand, even the linen closet down the hall. Nothing. Panic didn't hit me immediately. What I felt first was confusion, like maybe I was misremembering where I'd left it. But I knew better. Back in my room, I opened the top drawer of my desk. Amid expired printer ink and old pay stubs, something unfamiliar sat flat and folded. A receipt. My breath caught as I read the header. Silver Ponds, Charlotte, NC. $300. The item listed, MacBook Pro, serial number matching mine. The name signed at the bottom, Vera M. Wallace. For a full 30 seconds, I couldn't move. The paper trembled slightly between my fingers. It wasn't just that my laptop was gone. It wasn't just that my mother had pawned it. It was the casualness of it, the timing. She had waited until I'd gone to the store that afternoon. She knew I wouldn't check the drawer. She knew I'd be too busy cooking, cleaning, making sure the Christmas roast didn't burn while she and Dad lounged in the living room pretending not to hear the timer. I pulled out my phone, opened my banking app. There it was, confirmation. At 11:06 a.m., the power bill had been auto-deducted, $148.67. My name was still the account holder. They'd waited until I paid for everything. Then they kicked me out. My jaw tightened as I folded the receipt, slid it into my wallet, and closed the drawer. Back downstairs, I moved quietly past the dining room where the remains of dinner still sat untouched. I paused for just a second before stepping into the living room. The glow of the TV lit the room in a soft blue haze. Dad was out cold in the recliner, mouth slightly open, a blanket bunched at his feet. His snores filled the silence like a metronome, steady, ignorant. I moved toward the fireplace, needing something I couldn't yet name. The family photos were still there, lined up like trophies on the mantel. Except something was different. A new frame had been added. My eyes landed on it, and time slowed. It was a professionally taken family portrait, one of those cheesy department store studio shots with soft lighting and coordinated outfits. Dad in his Sunday flannel, Mom in her pearl earrings, Cairo looking smug in a collared shirt. But I wasn't in it. There was no empty space, no awkward crop, just three people smiling, with no sign that a fourth had ever existed. They'd taken a new family photo, and they hadn't told me. I stepped closer, scanning the background. It wasn't an old picture. They were wearing clothes I'd seen them buy last month. The date on the frame's sticker confirmed it, just 2 weeks ago. They had gone to the trouble of replacing me. Not just in words, not just in attitude, but in image. You don't erase someone on accident. I stared at the photo for a moment longer, then turned away. Back in my room, I knelt beside the bed and pulled out the shoebox labeled tax. It was dusty, the tape peeling. Inside, a meticulous record of everything I'd contributed over the past 3 years. Utility bills, car insurance premiums, receipts from the grocery store, and copies of transfer confirmations from my savings to theirs. Proof. They could delete photos. But not this. I sat at the edge of the bed, shoebox in my lap, my mind oddly still. Not spiraling, not even sad, just clear. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a family argument. This was betrayal, planned, quiet, and complete. They had played their hand. Now it was my turn. I didn't sleep that night. After leaving the house, I drove without direction for a while, circling familiar streets like I was trying to rewind something that couldn't be undone. Eventually, I parked in the lot of a gas station that had closed early for Christmas. The overhead lights flickered, casting my car in a low amber hue that made the frost on my windshield glow. I reclined the seat back just enough to ease the pressure in my lower back and wrapped my coat tighter around me. I didn't even check the rearview mirror. I didn't need to see myself to know how I looked. Hollow, like someone who had spent the last decade trying to earn a seat at a table she never realized had no chair for her in the first place. I powered on my phone. Still no calls. No texts, not even Cairo, who usually sent some lazy meme or a yo just to keep up the illusion that we were close. I stared at the cracked screen. "Merry Christmas to me," I whispered, and let the sarcasm float out with the condensation on the glass. The frost built up slowly as the cold outside seeped into the cabin. My breath fogged in the air. Still, I didn't cry. The hurt hadn't reached the surface yet. It was moving inside me like groundwater. Slow, deep, steady. I wasn't even sure it would ever show as tears. Maybe it would just sit there, settling into the corners of my bones. At some point, my eyes drifted shut. I don't know if I slept. Maybe I just blacked out from emotional exhaustion. When the sky started to lighten, I sat upright. My joints ached from the awkward angle. I stretched slowly, reached into my bag for a granola bar, and chewed without tasting it. Then I looked out the window and realized where I was parked, 3 blocks from my childhood street. It wasn't intentional, I swear. My hands must have driven on instinct, like I needed to be near something that once resembled safety. But I didn't want to go back to that house, Not after last night. Not after the pawn receipt. Not after the family photo that wrote me out like a bad memory. I let the engine turn over, heat blowing through vents that took their time warming. And then, without fully deciding, I put the car in drive and turned toward the house next door to ours. Althea's house. She'd been our neighbor for as long as I could remember. Retired schoolteacher, widow, the kind of woman who baked without recipes and could still recite all the U.S. presidents in order. When I was little, she gave me notebooks with my name etched in calligraphy on the cover. When Mom forgot to pick me up from choir practice, Althea would show up in that old blue sedan and never once make me feel like a burden. The porch light was on. I parked by the curb, hands sweating on the wheel. I didn't know what I was expecting. Maybe she'd smile. Maybe she'd frown and ask what I was doing out here at dawn like some lost teenager. But I needed something, anything, that didn't look at me like I owed it everything. I stepped out, legs stiff, boots crunching over salt and ice. I rang the bell once and waited. The door creaked open slowly. Althea stood in her robe, her eyes soft, her silver hair pulled back in a loose braid. She didn't flinch. She didn't even look surprised. "Sky," she said gently. "Come in, sweetheart. Let me put the kettle on." That was it. No questions, no pity in her voice, just an invitation. I stepped inside, the warmth wrapping around me like an old quilt. The smell of cinnamon and something herbal, probably chamomile, drifted through the air. I slipped off my coat, and she handed me slippers like it was the most natural thing in the world. The living room hadn't changed since I was 12. Books lined the walls, teacups displayed in an antique cabinet, and a faded patchwork afghan still draped over the armchair. I sat on the couch, sinking into a cushion that had known decades of stories. She disappeared into the kitchen. I could hear the kettle start to hiss. I didn't speak, and she didn't ask. It felt strange, being allowed to sit in silence without someone trying to fill it with noise or judgment. With my family, silence was either a weapon or a wall. Here, it was just space. Space to breathe. The tea arrived in a porcelain cup with little violets painted around the rim. She handed me a slice of toast, too, lightly buttered. No fanfare, no eat up, or you must be starving. Just food, just kindness. I took a sip and closed my eyes. She sat in the chair across from me, her own tea in hand. She didn't fidget, she didn't rush me, she just let me exist. After a while, she broke the quiet. "You want to shower and rest a bit? The guest room's still made up." I nodded. "If it's not trouble." Her brow lifted just slightly. "You've never been trouble." The words hit deeper than she probably meant them to. I blinked, swallowing hard. I didn't tell her about last night. I didn't mention Dad's words or the laptop or the photo. I didn't unpack the years of quiet erasure I had accepted as normal. But I think she knew. Maybe not the details, but the shape of the pain. She'd taught hundreds of kids. She knew the signs. I spent the rest of the morning in the guest room. I showered, dressed in clean clothes from my overnight bag, sat on the edge of the bed and watched the light crawl across the wall as the sun climbed. At noon, Althea knocked gently and left a sandwich and a note on the tray. "You're not alone. Rest, then rise." No lecture, no timeline, just space. That afternoon, I opened my laptop, the one I still had, my work backup, and began cataloging everything. Bills, messages, receipts. It was like sorting through the remains of a broken home, piece by piece. But it gave me clarity. Focus. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't reacting. I was preparing. No one had ever taught me how to protect myself from family. It always felt taboo to even think it. But Althea's silence gave me permission to let go of that rule. To admit that love without respect is just manipulation with prettier packaging. I didn't know what I'd do next. But I knew I wasn't going back to the house that decided I didn't exist. I didn't need anyone to tell me that was the right choice. Sometimes, what you don't say says everything. She didn't offer answers. She offered silence, and for once, that silence didn't hurt. By the time the sun had made its quiet crawl across Althea's floral curtains, I was already dressed and sipping lukewarm coffee at her kitchen table. The silence in her home wasn't tense or heavy. It was the kind of quiet that lets you think clearly, like you're finally allowed to hear yourself without interruption. My fingers hovered above the borrowed laptop she'd let me use, an older model that still ran better than my trust in people. I had already connected to her Wi-Fi, pulled up my email, and logged into the half-dozen accounts that had quietly kept my family's house running for the last 3 years. Electric, gas, internet, water, even the trash service, all under my name. I used to think it was a good thing. That they trusted me. That I was reliable. Needed. That was the lie I told myself every time I signed a renewal contract or paid a late bill without being asked. It wasn't trust. It was dependence disguised as love. And now, looking at the due dates and the balance totals, I saw the truth. I had paid for their comfort at the cost of my own clarity. The cursor blinked at me like it was waiting for permission to move. I clicked disconnect on the electric account. Then the gas, internet, water, trash pickup. Every click was a small, silent reclaiming. They didn't just lose a daughter last night, they lost the person keeping their lights on. Somewhere around the third cancellation, I paused and leaned back in my chair. My hands were steady, my chest no longer burned. There was no guilt, only breath. That house ran because of me. If they thought they could erase me and still enjoy the benefits of my labor, it was time they felt the absence they created. A few hours passed. Althea didn't interrupt. She just dropped a fresh cup of coffee beside me, gave my shoulder a quiet pat, and went back to reading by the window. The first text came just after lunch. I didn't recognize the number right away, but the area code was local. Sky, you're not gonna believe this. Power cut out mid-dinner at your parents'. Chaos. I blinked. The next text came with screenshots, blurry images of a candlelit dining table, faces half lit, half confused. One message stood out in bold font. Is it true? You were the one paying for everything? I didn't answer. I didn't even smirk. But inside, something shifted, like a door had quietly closed with a satisfying click. They had another holiday dinner. Without me, no warning, no invitation, and the power had gone out right in the middle of it. Perfect timing. And now the people they'd spent years crafting a perfect image for, they were finally seeing through the cracks. I scrolled through the texts again, not to read them, but to feel the weight of them, the sudden shift. The realization hitting them all at once. They had built a life using parts of me they never acknowledged. That night, while Althea wrapped up her knitting and turned in early, I stayed up with the glow of the laptop lighting my face in the dark. I opened a blank email. No subject line yet, no greeting. Just the blinking cursor again, waiting patiently. I clicked attach and selected the files I had organized so carefully. Utility receipts, insurance payments, payment logs, bank transfers. Every line item showed my name, my signature, my responsibility. Every bit of proof that I hadn't just contributed. I had carried them. The subject line came to me all at once. This is the last thing I will ever send to this family. No explanation, no story, no plea for understanding, just facts. I hit send, then I blocked every single recipient. It was almost too quiet afterward, like the moment you shut off a car engine after a long road trip and your ears still ring from the hum. But I felt no regret, not even a sliver. I slept deeply that night, not because things were fixed, but because I finally stopped holding up something that was never mine to support. The next morning, I woke to the smell of toast and the sound of birds somewhere near the window. Althea's voice was soft as she greeted me, but she didn't linger, just handed me a plate and let me eat in peace. I was halfway through a slice when my phone lit up with a notification. Rachel. I hadn't heard from my cousin in months. We used to be close when we were kids, back before family reunions started to feel like job interviews and competition replaced conversation. Her message was short. I had no idea. I'm so sorry. I stared at the words for a long moment. My fingers hovered over the screen. I could have replied, could have said something sarcastic or cold, could have asked why she never reached out sooner, but I didn't. Instead, I turned the screen off and placed the phone face down on the table. It was enough. She saw the truth. Finally, someone outside those walls saw what I had been carrying. The ice that had hardened inside me cracked just a little, not enough to break, not yet, but it shifted. I finished my toast, washed the plate, and let myself sit in the quiet. They wanted to pretend I was never part of that family. Fine. But I had the paperwork to prove otherwise. And now, so did everyone else. I didn't raise my voice, but somehow, the lights went out, and the truth turned on. The next morning, I woke up to the faint buzz of my phone vibrating against the wooden nightstand. At first, I ignored it, thinking it was another notification from the family group chat I hadn't seen since Christmas Eve. But the screen stayed lit a second too long enough to catch my attention. Security alert, suspicious login attempt to your savings account. I sat up straight, the blanket pooling around my waist. The room was still dim, with soft light pushing through the curtains. My hands moved on instinct. I unlocked the phone and opened the alert. The bank had flagged an IP address they recognized, one that had been previously linked to my home network. I scrolled down. A second message had come in less than 2 minutes later. Caller attempted verification by phone. Failed security questions. I closed my eyes, jaw tightening. My chest didn't ache this time. It burned, low and sharp, like someone had driven a nail through the final nerve I had left. I didn't pace. I didn't panic. I opened the bank's app and called customer service. A woman named Carla answered. She sounded younger than me, cheerful in the way someone is when they haven't been chewed up by family yet. I just received a fraud alert, I told her, keeping my tone even. I need to verify the activity and lock the account. She asked me the standard questions: mother's maiden name, last transaction, zip code. Then came the pause, the part where she pulled up the details. I do see that someone attempted access earlier this morning, she said. They used partial information that matched your file. From where? Her keyboard clicks were soft but deliberate. IP matches your previous primary login location. You mean my parents' house? Another pause. Carla didn't confirm it, but she didn't need to. Was the caller a woman? A beat, then, yes, ma'am. I drew in a slow breath. Please flag the account. I want to add verbal-only authentication and remove any secondary IP logins. Also, send me a statement with the attempt details. Of course, she said gently. Are you okay? I paused for the first time. No, I said. But I will be. We ended the call. I placed the phone on the table and stared at the ceiling for a few seconds before I moved. Then, calmly, I walked to the kitchen where Althea was stirring something in a small pot. Oatmeal, maybe. She didn't turn when I entered. Morning, sweetheart. Morning. She must have sensed something in my voice. She turned slightly, gave me a look that asked everything without saying a word. I gave her a soft nod, grabbed my laptop, and returned to the dining table. I opened a blank email. No greeting. Just the kind of message that couldn't be misread. If any further attempts are made to access my financial accounts or property, legal action will follow. This is not a threat. This is documentation. I stared at it for a moment, then typed the final sentence. What's yours is yours. What's mine is protected now. I didn't sign it with Love Sky. I didn't sign it at all. Just sent it. Then I blocked both their emails. After lunch, I needed to clear my head. I opened the folder I hadn't touched in months, the one I used to organize legal documents back when I was helping Dad refinance the house. I still had the files, out of habit, out of hope maybe, that keeping proof meant keeping peace. I scrolled through PDFs, mortgage contracts, insurance renewals, property tax receipts. That's when I found it. The original homeowner's insurance policy had both our names, Weldon and Sky Wallace. I remembered the day we set it up. I had co-signed everything when his credit was too low. The agent said, "You're doing a good thing, helping your father like this." Now a new document, same policy, different date. Only 2 names, Weldon and Cairo. I blinked, went back to check the revision date. 2 months ago. While I was still paying the premiums, while I was still under the impression that the house, though never legally mine, still honored my name for what it represented. A daughter who never said no, even when she should have. I clicked through a few more documents, my fingers cold against the keyboard. Then I whispered aloud, more to the quiet around me than to myself. You didn't just erase me emotionally. You tried to erase me legally. The fact that my name had been removed so quietly, without notice, was one thing. But the fact that they did it while still letting me foot the bill? That was war. I printed everything. Every invoice, every copy of the switch, every receipt tied to the house. Althea helped me set up her old scanner, and we went through the files together. She didn't ask for details. She didn't say, "You should have seen this coming." She just poured tea and helped label folders. I had spent my whole life believing silence was the price of loyalty. But now, I was learning that silence could also be a weapon, if used precisely. This wasn't revenge. This wasn't about evening the score or teaching them a lesson. This was protection. This was what self-defense looked like when you didn't have fists to throw, but had a printer and a timeline. That evening, I created a master folder on a thumb drive. Inside, every document, every email, every dollar accounted for. In the eyes of the law, I had receipts. They declared me the villain. I'd show them the contract they signed. They thought silence meant surrender. I was just loading my arsenal. It didn't take long for them to respond. Less than 24 hours after I sent the email, the one with the warning and the legal language so clear even a child could understand it, my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but I knew the voice the moment I picked up. "Sky," my mother began. "We need to talk." I didn't say anything. Her voice sharpened. "You're seriously going through with this? After everything we've done for you?" Still, I stayed silent. She took that as permission to continue, and the flood came quickly. "We gave you everything. Your childhood, your room, your clothes. We let you stay here while you found yourself, and now this, threatening legal action against your own parents? Let—" the word bounced around in my skull like a bell. "Let me stay," as if my money hadn't kept the lights on. As if I hadn't been covering everything from groceries to mom's prescriptions while they sat back and acted like they were doing me a favor by letting me sleep in my old room. "You think we owe you something?" she hissed. "You wouldn't have anything if it weren't for us. You owe us, Sky. You owe us your life." I pressed the phone tighter to my ear, not because I wanted to hear more, but because I needed to hear it all, every venomous word. "I hope you know what you're doing," she snapped, voice rising. "Because once you take this step, there's no coming back." She waited, but I had nothing left to say. I hung up, and this time, it was me who made the silence feel heavy. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stared at the phone in my hand, my pulse steady. "They see love as a transaction," I said quietly to myself. "Every diaper, every meal. Now a debt I'm expected to pay forever." Later, as I sat back at Althea's kitchen table, the steam rising from the cup of tea she slid in front of me seemed almost symbolic. Warmth offered freely, without expectation. She eased into the seat across from me, her sweater sleeves pushed up, her eyes soft but knowing. "That's not how love works, honey," she said. "They're confusing obligation with ownership." I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding and nodded slowly. Time to make that clear. By afternoon, I was in the quiet waiting room of a law office. The scent of old paper and brewed coffee lingered in the air. A woman in her mid-40s, wearing no-nonsense heels and wire-rimmed glasses, sat across from me, flipping through the folders I had brought. She didn't ask me why I wanted to do this. She didn't give me a lecture on family or reconciliation. She just examined the documents with the kind of focus I hadn't seen in anyone since grad school. "You've got everything you need," she said at last, closing the last folder and tapping her pen against the cover. "Timeline's airtight. Paper trail is clean. This isn't just reaction. This is documentation." I nodded. She slid 2 forms toward me, one for the restraining order, the other, the civil claim, for fraudulent removal of my name from the property, unauthorized use of financial accounts, and recovery of funds. I signed them both, not with a flourish, not with emotion, just with a steadiness that came from months, no, years, of swallowing things that never should have been mine to digest. When I finished, she collected the forms and gave me a look, not pitying, but respectful. "You're doing the right thing," she said. "I know," I replied. The office was quiet as I stood, smoothed down my coat, and walked out into the cold again. Charlotte's winter didn't bite like northern states did, but it still had a way of making you feel awake, alive, real. Back at Althea's, I brewed a fresh pot of coffee and sat down at the small desk in the corner of the guest room. My laptop flickered on, the background image still the one from my last vacation, an image I barely remembered taking. For a moment, I stared at it. Then I opened my inbox. My fingers moved swiftly. I sent an email to HR requesting time off. I used simple language, no explanations. "I'll be taking an extended leave effective immediately. I'll provide documentation if needed." Then I hit send. This wasn't me running away. This was me clearing the deck so I could stand up taller without the weight of old anchors chained to my ankles. I didn't tell Althea I had filed the papers. She'd know soon enough. She didn't need me to say it aloud. Some truths sit more comfortably in the space between words. That evening, she made cornbread and stew. We ate quietly, the way two people do when they understand each other without the burden of constant dialogue. After dinner, she poured us both glasses of warm cider, and we sat on the couch, the lamp casting a soft glow against the bookcase. "I'm not doing this to punish them," I said quietly, breaking the silence. Althea didn't turn to look at me. She just nodded once, like she'd known it all along. "I'm doing it so they never get the chance to do it again, to me, or to anyone else." She sipped her cider. "That's what boundaries are, Sky. Not walls. Lines. Clear ones." I sat with that for a while. This wasn't vengeance. This was the paperwork of survival. The sun hadn't even cleared the horizon when the text messages started rolling in. First, it was Emma, a girl I'd shared a dorm with in college. We hadn't spoken in 2 years. "I heard what you did," she wrote. "How could you turn your back on your own parents?" Then a former coworker chimed in. "They're saying you took money that wasn't yours. Is that true?" A few others followed, short, vague, all soaked in the same tone: disbelief, judgment, the kind of messages that don't come from people asking because they care, but because they've already made up their minds. I sat on Althea's porch swing, wrapped in a thick gray shawl she'd draped over the backrest, my phone glowing against the morning chill. I didn't respond to any of them, not out of anger, not even out of pride, just fatigue. The lies had moved fast, faster than the truth ever could. Dad must have started talking the moment he realized I wasn't backing down. He was always better at playing the victim than telling the whole story, and people believed him because he sounded like a man trying to keep his family together, while I, apparently, was now the woman trying to tear it apart. Funny how quiet some folks had been all those years I paid the mortgage. I stared at the screen, thumb hovering, then opened the note app on my phone. I copied the case number from my civil claim and pasted it into a new message. That's all I'd send back if I replied at all. Proof. Let them choke on it. The day moved slowly after that. Althea busied herself with chores. I tried to read but couldn't concentrate. Around 5 o'clock, I made a simple dinner for us both, grilled cheese and tomato soup, then cleaned the kitchen while she watered the plants. We had just settled into the living room, cups of tea in hand, when the knock came. It wasn't the kind of knock you hear and think, "Oh, someone's dropping by." It was loud, demanding, repetitive. 3 sharp bangs, a pause, then 2 more. I froze. Althea rose quietly and walked to the front window, pulling the curtain back just an inch. She turned to me, her voice calm but firm. "It's him." I didn't need to ask who. I already knew. I stood slowly, my fingers tight around the handle of my mug. Another knock, harder this time. Then his voice. "Sky!" Weldon's voice cracked through the quiet evening air. "You want a war? You got one. I want my damn car back." Althea stepped closer to me, her presence steady. "You don't have to open that door." I nodded, my heart beating hard now, but not out of fear, out of focus. I set the mug down, reached for my phone, and dialed. 911, what's your emergency? My father is trespassing at my location. He's shouting and attempting to intimidate me. I have a restraining order pending, and I need assistance. The dispatcher was efficient. Calm. Promised officers would arrive in minutes. Outside, Dad kept yelling, "You're not getting away with this, Sky. That car is mine. Everything you have came from me." I walked to the peephole and looked out. He was red-faced, pacing in the front yard, fists clenched, voice echoing down the block. The lights in nearby houses flicked on, curtains shifted. A neighbor stepped out across the street. Mrs. Perkins, I think her name was. She held a phone in her hand. Filming. Dad didn't notice. Althea placed her hand lightly on my shoulder. "You did the right thing calling." I nodded again. Soon, blue and red lights washed across the porch. Two officers stepped out of the cruiser and approached slowly, their flashlights catching Dad mid-rant. "Sir, step away from the door," one officer said firmly. "Hands where we can see them." Dad turned, startled. "This is my daughter's house. My car. I have every right." "She doesn't live under your roof anymore, sir," the second officer cut in, "and the vehicle is registered in her name. We've reviewed the documentation." "The keys, sir," the first officer said. For a second, Dad didn't move. He just stood there, jaw clenched, breathing heavy like he was still looking for a fight. But then he reached into his coat pocket, pulled the spare keys out, and handed them over. The moment the keys left his hand, his shoulders slumped. All the noise drained from his body, like he realized too late that no one was playing by his rules anymore. They escorted him to the curb. Neighbors had gathered quietly, watching from porches and driveways. A few muttered to each other. No one stepped in. And finally, I exhaled. Not just air, something deeper, something buried. I closed the door gently. Althea stayed close but didn't say anything. We both sat down again, slowly, carefully, as if something sacred had just ended. After a while, she said softly, "You did the hard thing. That's what makes it brave." I didn't respond right away, just looked at her and gave the smallest nod. That night, I lay awake in the guest room, not from stress, but from the unfamiliar feeling of safety. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. New messages. This time, the tone had shifted. "Sky, I didn't know everything. I'm sorry. I just saw the video. That was a lot. Are you okay? I always believed you. I was just scared to say it." I didn't respond, not yet, because I realized something. Those texts weren't about me. They were about people trying to clear their conscience, hoping I'd give them permission to feel better about staying silent. But silence had a cost. One I'd paid too many times already. Still, I didn't feel bitter. I felt clear. Because the first time my father said, "My house, my rules," I believed him. Tonight, the rules changed. New Year's Eve crept in quietly. No fanfare, no countdowns in my world. Just the ticking of a clock on Althea's mantle and the occasional hum of the space heater. I hadn't planned to stay this long, but I also hadn't planned for the world to tilt quite the way it had. Some shifts don't come with announcements. They arrive in silence and settle like dust on everything you thought you could still recognize. It was around 10:30 that morning when I got the voicemail. "Sky, it's Rachel. I didn't want to be the one to tell you this, but they lost the house. The bank posted the foreclosure notice this morning. It's done." She didn't say, "your parents." She said they. I noted that, small shift, but meaningful. I didn't replay the message. I didn't need to. I sat still for a long time, hands wrapped around my coffee mug, feeling the heat fade slowly. No sense of victory came. No vindication. Just a quiet understanding that the natural consequence had finally arrived. They gambled I would come back. They bet on my guilt. On the strings they had pulled so many times, they assumed they'd always be able to tug them and make me dance. They were wrong. Later that afternoon, my phone buzzed again. It was Vera. I watched the screen until the ringing stopped. When the voicemail icon popped up, I waited a minute before hitting play. Her voice was smaller than I'd ever heard it. "We didn't know it would come to this. We just thought you'd come back eventually, that you'd cool off, that maybe you'd remember we're still your parents. That you'd stop trying to punish us. We're your family, Sky. Families fight. But they come back. I blocked the number after that, not out of spite, but self-preservation. I had warned them, explicitly, repeatedly. They chose to believe the rules didn't apply to them, so they lost the game they rigged. Around the neighborhood, word was spreading. I didn't have to say anything. The videos of Dad yelling on Althea's porch had already made their way to several local Facebook groups. It didn't take long before neighbors started whispering or flat-out messaging me with neutral offerings. Hope you're okay. Hang in there. And the most infuriating one, there are two sides to every story. Cairo, naturally, took to social media with a string of vague posts. You think you know someone. I'd never betray blood like that. But his likes were few. His audience quieter now. I didn't comment, didn't repost. I watched from a distance and let it all happen. Because for the first time, I didn't need to prove anything. The truth had become its own echo chamber. All I had to do was let it ring. 2 days earlier, a therapist from a local college had reached out. She was organizing a panel on boundaries in family systems, stories of reclaiming identity after emotional estrangement. She asked if I would speak. At first, I almost said no. What could I possibly say that wouldn't sound like just another bad daughter complaining about childhood wounds? But the more I sat with it, the more I realized this wasn't about blaming. It was about freeing the next person who didn't know how to call abuse what it really was, just because it wore a Christmas sweater and said grace at dinner. So I said yes. And now, here I was, sitting in the back row of a modest auditorium at Charlotte Community College, wearing a thrifted blazer, flats that pinched slightly, and hands shaking just enough to remind me this still mattered. I didn't bring slides. I didn't need a PowerPoint to tell the truth. When it was my turn, I walked slowly to the podium. The lights were softer than I expected, the room quieter. No one shuffled, no one whispered. I cleared my throat. Hi, I'm Sky. The mic picked up even my breath. A lot of people think that love and obligation are the same thing, that if someone feeds you, houses you, puts a roof over your head, even if they humiliate you in the process, you owe them forever. And if you stop paying, they call you ungrateful. A pause. They don't call you tired. They don't call you brave. They don't call you a survivor. They call you selfish, cold, a leech. I let the word hang. I heard that word not long ago, from my own father, at the dinner table, because I got promoted, because I spoke up. The room was completely still. No one stood up for me. Not then. Not when they took my things. Not when they spread lies. But that silence, it gave me space, and I filled it with truth, with boundaries, with paperwork. And I stopped apologizing for not setting myself on fire to keep them warm. I didn't cry. My voice didn't crack. I told the story without names, without revenge. Just facts. Just truth. When I finished, the silence broke into applause. Not thunderous, but solid. Real. Afterward, a girl no older than 20 stopped me near the snack table. Her hands trembled slightly as she held out a napkin-wrapped cookie. I thought it was just me, she said. I took the cookie, my throat tightening. It never is. That night, as Althea drove us home, the Charlotte skyline sparkled ahead. Fireworks were already starting near downtown, the bursts of color reflecting off office buildings and glassy towers. I stared out the window, not really seeing the lights. They had written me out of their photo, but I had taken the frame, flipped it over, and rebuilt the entire thing. And this time, the new year starts with my name on the door, and no one else holding the key. The first morning of the new year was quiet. Not the uncomfortable kind, but the kind that felt earned. I woke before the sun, the only sound in my new apartment being the gentle hum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of the wall clock I'd hung by the kitchen nook. Nothing in the space was luxurious, secondhand furniture, mismatched plates, but every item in that apartment belonged to me, bought, paid for, and chosen on my terms. I pulled on a sweatshirt and padded across the hardwood floor to the window. The streets below were still damp from the late-night celebrations, confetti scattered near the curb, a few deflated balloons tangled in a streetlight wire. Charlotte looked slower this morning, like the entire city had decided to take a breath. Beside the small desk I'd set up in the corner was a cardboard box I hadn't touched since moving in. I opened it now, pulling out the last few things I'd never had time or energy to deal with. Tax folders, a couple of framed photos, and a sealed envelope marked payroll. Inside was my most recent paycheck. The first one with only my name on it. No automatic transfers, no hidden family bills, just clean, earned income for my work alone. I smiled and slid it into a frame I'd bought at the thrift store. I didn't hang it. I didn't need anyone else to see it. I just wanted to know it was there. Later that day, while organizing the tiny kitchen drawer where I kept pens and random paper clips, I came across a small envelope with fading ink. It had been tucked into the side wall of the box, probably from before the move. I didn't have to open it to know who it was from. Vera. The handwriting was still perfect, still dramatic in its loops and flourishes, still pretending everything was okay. I didn't open it. Some things don't need to be read to be understood. Healing, I realized, wasn't about pretending the pain had never happened. It was about learning how to live next to it without letting it drag you backward. I slid the envelope back into the drawer, behind a stack of old receipts. Around noon, I made my way to the courthouse. My attorney had asked me to stop by for a final update. I didn't wear anything special, just clean jeans and a soft gray cardigan, but I held my head high when I walked through those doors. The waiting room was mostly empty. I found a seat near the window and watched as clouds drifted across the January sky. She arrived a few minutes later and gave me a small smile before sitting. "They didn't show," she said plainly, flipping open her file. I wasn't surprised. "The judge approved the motion," she continued. "Your name has been removed from all prior joint accounts and liabilities, permanently." I nodded. "Good." She tapped her pen twice on the folder. "You've handled this with a lot more grace than most would have." I gave a half smile. Grace is cheaper than therapy. We exchanged a few more formalities, signed the last page, and that was it. Done. I didn't linger, didn't walk out dramatically. I just returned to my car, sat behind the wheel, and exhaled into the silence, the kind that didn't ache anymore. That afternoon, back in my apartment, I opened my laptop and found a text from Rachel waiting. "They're with Uncle Rick now." But even he's getting tired of their stories. I stared at the message, then typed my reply slowly. They'll have to learn how to survive without rewriting mine. No emoji, no signature. I set the phone down and turned to the grant application I'd been working on. A nonprofit supporting young adults estranged from toxic families. I'd been drafting the proposal since before Christmas, but something about today made it easier to finish. I reread the mission statement, adjusted a few lines for clarity, then hit submit. The screen blinked once. Application sent. That night, I lit a candle, the kind Althea used to burn after dinner, cinnamon and clove, and sat by the window. The world didn't look new. It looked the same, but I was different. They had taken what they could, money, time, trust. But what I'd built from those losses, from those cracks in the foundation, that belonged to me now. And no one, not even blood, was taking it back. Some names stay on legal papers. Others get etched into the stories we live after them. Sometimes the people who raise us teach us loyalty, while quietly erasing our worth behind closed doors. This wasn't just a story about bills and betrayal. It was about boundaries, about learning that love without respect is just control in disguise. So tell me, have you ever had to walk away from the people who claim to love you just to save yourself? If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful true life stories every week. Your story might be next.